Welcome to our International Student Brief program. Today, we have some fascinating stories lined up for you. First off, Toronto is considering an action plan to tackle its growing rat population, driven by construction projects and climate change. Councillors are looking into strategies from cities like New York and Ottawa to better coordinate efforts across various agencies. Next, we dive into history with new research from the University of York, revealing how medieval pilgrimages helped revive England's urban economies after the Black Death. This form of mass tourism, centered around religious shrines, boosted local economies and spawned a whole industry of pilgrimage memorabilia. Finally, we explore the life and career of Judi Dench in a new book that captures her 7-decade journey through Shakespearean roles. With anecdotes and personal stories, this book offers a deep dive into the world of one of the greatest actors of our time. Please stay tuned for more detailed coverage. The Independent. New research from the University of York Centre for Pilgrimage Studies has uncovered how medieval mass tourism played a crucial role in reviving England's economy after the Black Death. The plague wiped out a third of the population, causing significant economic decline, particularly in urban areas. However, the fear of death drove people to become more religious, leading to a boom in pilgrimages to saintly shrines. Major pilgrimage centers strategically marketed their offerings around 4 times a year to manage the influx of visitors and maximize profits. Dr. John Jenkins' research highlights the efficient production and sale of pilgrimage memorabilia, such as badges, which were mass-produced by specialist makers. This pilgrimage industry not only boosted local economies but also reflected political tensions, as some pilgrimages were seen as acts of subversion against the government. The Salisbury Museum will soon showcase an extensive collection of these badges, revealing the widespread travel habits of medieval citizens. The Globe and Mail. Toronto and Ottawa are grappling with a severe rat problem, exacerbated by construction projects and climate change. Toronto, identified as Canada's rattiest city by Orkin, faces a disjointed approach to rat control, with different agencies managing infestations in various facilities. Councillors are now pushing for a coordinated action plan, looking to strategies from cities like New York and Ottawa. Ottawa is experimenting with rat birth control, while New York has introduced measures like restricting garbage disposal times and appointing a rat czar. Alberta, on the other hand, has maintained a rat-free status for over 70 years through proactive measures, including border patrols and a no-pet rat policy. Despite these efforts, experts like the Globe's Oliver Moore remain skeptical about completely eradicating rats in cities like Toronto, suggesting that the best approach is to keep individual properties clean to displace the rodents. The Guardian. In Shakespeare, The Man Who Pays the Rent, Judi Dench, through interviews with actor Brendan O'Haya, reflects on her illustrious career playing almost every major female Shakespearean role. The book, organized by Play, combines Dench's anecdotes with insightful commentary on her performances alongside legends like Ian McKellen and Anthony Hopkins. Dench shares humorous tales of onstage mishaps, emphasizing that there is no single correct way to perform Shakespeare. Despite her deteriorating eyesight, Dench's passion for the bard remains undiminished, with Barbara Flynn narrating most of the book while Dench herself recites excerpts and engages in a lively Q&A with O'Haya. The book captures Dench's impish humor and deep knowledge, making it a delightful exploration of her 7 decades in theater and film. Japan Times. China is under immense pressure to increase its domestic food production as grain imports reach unprecedented levels amid rising trade tensions. With less than 10% of the world's arable land, China feeds a fifth of the global population, heavily relying on foreign purchases to balance its needs. In response, Beijing is investing heavily in technology and financial resources to convert unproductive, saline, or polluted lands into fertile farms. This initiative is a crucial part of President Xi Jinping's broader strategy to achieve self-sufficiency, especially as relations with Western nations deteriorate, a potential second Trump presidency looms, and the ongoing conflict in Ukraine highlights the vulnerabilities in global supply chains. Additionally, extreme weather events exacerbated by climate change are increasingly disrupting both domestic and international harvests, further emphasizing the need for China to secure its food supply. The Sydney Morning Herald. Chinese students dominate the surge in asylum claims in Australia, outnumbering applicants from other nationalities as the country tightens regulations on international education. Despite the crackdown, visas for Chinese students continue to be approved at significantly higher rates compared to other countries, prompting calls for a review of the risk-based visa system. Former immigration official Abul Rizvi anticipates a continued rise in student asylum claims due to restrictions on visa hopping and the Albanese government's plans to cap student numbers to control net overseas migration. In May alone, there were 357 asylum applications, a significant increase from previous months. The approval rate for Chinese student visas stands at nearly 94%, in stark contrast to lower approval rates for students from India and Colombia. Critics argue that many Chinese applicants are middle-class individuals seeking better opportunities rather than genuine asylum seekers. The Australian government faces pressure to address the issue of baseless asylum claims and manage the growing backlog of protection applications. Telegraph. The number of foreign workers and students moving to the UK has plummeted by more than a third following a crackdown on immigrants bringing dependents. The issuance of skilled worker, study, and health and care visas dropped by 34.1% in the first half of this year compared to the same period last year, marking the most significant decline since the pandemic. This reduction is part of Prime Minister Rishi Sunak's measures to curb immigration, including banning dependents for foreign workers and students, raising the skilled worker salary threshold, and limiting shortage occupation visa schemes. Net migration has decreased to 685,000 for the year ending December 2023, down from a record high of 764,000 the previous year. Upcoming government plans aim to reduce British companies' reliance on foreign labour and enhance domestic worker training and recruitment. Critics argue that the high cost of visas and restrictive rules on dependents are hindering the UK's ability to attract top talent, particularly in the science sector. The Labour Party, while under pressure to relax visa controls, is expected to continue with the existing legal migration measures. The Globe and Mail paints a grim picture of Canada's aging water infrastructure, highlighted by a recent catastrophic leak in Calgary's Bearspaw South Feeder main. Inspection robots revealed 5 more potential points of failure along the line, despite the pipe being rated in good condition before the incident. This issue isn't isolated to Calgary. Nearly 1/5 of Canada's drinking water pipes were installed before 1970 and are nearing the end of their useful lives, with the situation being even worse in the country's 10 largest cities. Oliver Moore and Teuton Ha report that 23.9% of pipes in these cities date back to the 1960s or earlier, leading to thousands of breaks each year. Municipalities are struggling to fund necessary repairs and replacements, with Toronto spending only half of the $1.74 billion needed annually for upkeep. The sheer scale of the problem and the lack of political will to address it make this an ongoing crisis, likened to gambling with public safety by Robert Holler of the Canadian Water and Wastewater Association. The Sydney Morning Herald reveals a troubling trend of international students in Australia seeking asylum, which has seen a threefold increase over 6 years. The Department of Home Affairs reports that Chinese nationals lead these protection claims, with 3,555 applications in the past 5 years. This surge adds to a record-breaking backlog of 40,000 asylum seekers in Australia. Former Deputy Secretary of the Department of Immigration Abul Rizvi suggests that restrictions on visa hopping and student caps are driving this trend. The Albanese government has introduced stricter regulations to curb the influx, including tougher English language tests and a more rigorous, genuine student test. However, the rise in asylum claims from students highlights vulnerabilities in the system, raising concerns about its potential for abuse and the impact on Australia's higher education sector, which relies heavily on international students for revenue. In another report by the Sydney Morning Herald, Victoria's economy faces a potential $6 billion loss over 3 years if the federal government caps international student enrollments by 30,000. Research commissioned by the University of Melbourne and Monash University indicates that each international student generates an additional $44,000 in benefits to the state beyond tuition fees. The proposed caps aim to have migration to 260,000, but university leaders warn this will strain state and federal budgets, undermine vital research, and damage Victoria's standing as a premier education destination. Federal Education Minister Jason Clare argues that the reforms will ensure quality and integrity in the sector, with implementation set for January 2025. However, business and academic leaders caution that reducing international student numbers will hurt the economy, impact jobs, and weaken the viability of universities, urging the government to reconsider the caps to maintain Victoria's competitive advantage. Telegraph. There must be a piece of ancient evolutionary wiring in the human brain that can identify a rat without even really seeing it. I was walking down our hallway, carrying a tower of newly folded laundry, when I registered a skittering movement to my left. Something slick and brown and dismayingly large, running into the cupboard containing my children's toys. And in its wake, a smell of sewage so dense as to be almost visible, a cartoon cloud of greenish, fly-blown pong. According to the pest control man who arrived a few hours later, you can tell when a rat has swum up through the sewers because it leaves brown streaks wherever it touches the walls. That, and the stench. London rats are absolute thugs, he says, big and athletic and totally fearless. They can swim up into toilet bowls, pushing open the lids with their noses. They can squeeze through the outflow pipe behind a dishwasher, nibble through lead and aluminium, and make mincemeat of all the plastic plumbing hidden behind the skirting boards. Horrifying though all this is, and incredibly expensive to fix, I find myself unable to resist a touch of admiration. London's wildlife, which largely means its pest life, occupies this city far more effectively than we humans do. There are 9 million people in London, compared with roughly 19 million rats, 3 million pigeons and 500,000 mice. Tens of thousands of foxes now live in the capital, considerably more per square meter than in some rural areas. Even seagulls, which are in precipitous decline elsewhere in the country, are thriving in London. It is a measure of human solipsism and animal stealth, that despite being so comprehensively outnumbered by verminous beasts, we Londoners are always surprised to see one. A couple of weeks ago, as I ate my breakfast while gazing blankly into the back garden, a fox hopped over the wall. It had a chicken in its mouth, a live, feathered chicken, no doubt pilfered from some hackney bohemian trying to live like a peasant. It stared insolently at me, all handsome and red like a fox in a children's book, and then trotted on towards wherever it has made its invisible home. The mayor of New York has announced a plan to combat the city's rat problem by introducing wheelie bins. Declaring a revolution, Eric Adams promised, "This is a rat-proof container and it is going to do the job." His optimism is touching, but diluted. London's rats mastered the wheelie bin 2 decades ago. Vermin are the real city slickers, we humans have merely adapted to live alongside them. Telegraph. Dear Sam, it surely can't be fair that I was encouraged and financially supported through tertiary education while my sister has not been offered the same chance. It feels like I am part of a costume drama, but this is true. My mum has relied on the generosity of her parents to cover the cost of my accommodation and tuition fees. I graduated last year and am enjoying my postgraduate career in medical research. I am thankful not to have student debt and to have found work, which is not true for the entire alumni, but I was devastated to hear from my sister that despite qualifying for university, she has decided against it. She would have to rack up student debts and support herself because our grandparents believe it is more important for boys to have a good education than girls, and are unwilling to give her the same support I had. It is so old-fashioned and unreasonable. Is there anything I can do? Anon. Dear reader, thank you for using your male privilege to advocate for your sister. If every man who gained an unfair advantage stood up for a disadvantaged woman and took the time to educate family and peers on the unfairness of the current systems, we would have equality done and dusted in no time at all. In purely financial terms, it makes no sense for you to raise finance for your sister if she can get her own student finance to cover her study ambitions. Personal loan rates and repayment terms are generally less favorable than student finance terms. You haven't said how much your new career is paying, but as a graduate, even without student loan deductions from your pay, you probably have limited, spare income. You could of course offer to help her from your own pocket if you are able, and assuming your sister really wants to pursue a tertiary education. I think it is best for anyone enabling someone else's development to manage expectations appropriately. Parents the world over end up disappointed when their budding doctors and lawyers drop out partway through a program of education. There are other graduates who never capitalize on the qualification, and those who funded the course find the return on investment never really shows up and are left wondering why they bothered. I think it is important to discuss options with your sister and make your desire to enable her clear, but take care not to imprint your ideas on her. It won't do either of you as individuals or the cause any good if she is encouraged to rail against the old-fashioned limitations just for the sake of it. She may well be more content following a career or personal path that doesn't require a university degree. There are many, whatever gender one identifies with. You mention your mother and her reliance on her parents, and nothing about your father. I am guessing this is deliberate, and the dependence on the more mature members of the family is the source of what appears to you to be old-fashioned ideas. It may help you to remember your grandmother would likely have been brought up in a system that taxed her as part of her husband's tax record. Independent taxation was introduced in 1990, required her to get her husband's permission to obtain credit, until the Equal Credit Opportunity Act 1974, and she may have expected to be paid less than a man for the same work. The Equal Pay Act wasn't introduced until 1970. Much has changed during your grandparents' lifetime. It sounds as though research is a strength of yours, given your profession. Perhaps you could help your grandparents understand the changing landscape of gender equality and ask if they wouldn't like to fuel it by offering the same education opportunities to your sister as they did to you. I find gratitude is an antidote to most angst in my life. Your life will be happier and easier if you remain respectful and grateful for what you have, but women everywhere are also grateful to you for calling out your male privilege and sticking up for your sister. Thank you. The Globe and Mail. Good morning. Finally, a little reassurance about the rise of Europe's far right, more on that below, along with Canada's 2-0 loss to Argentina at the Copa and a sudden Green Party resignation. Today's headlines: Europe. Cooling the far-right fever. It's been a month of mixed messages when it comes to Europe's political ecosystem. First, voters in the European Union's parliamentary elections punished their ruling centrist parties and handed more power to the once fringe far-right. The results were so bad in France that President Emmanuel Macron rolled the dice on a snap election, only to see Marine Le Pen's extreme national rally make huge gains in the first round of voting. But then Britain, which, yes, no longer in the EU, moved toward the center-left last week with a Labour landslide. And on Sunday, a hastily assembled left-wing alliance thwarted the national rally in France's final round of voting. So can we all now breathe a sigh of relief when it comes to the far-right's ascendance? I called up Amy Verdun, a professor of political science at the University of Victoria, to find out. What will Sunday's election mean for Emmanuel Macron? This election was an ultra gamble on the part of Macron, and the gamble failed. Macron came into power to rule from the center. Now, he will need a coalition, which will be super difficult to find because the left is a hodgepodge and the right is the national rally. The election was a strategic political move on Macron's part to stop the rally's momentum, and people did not like it. There was no domestic reason for a new election. So they voted against Macron's leadership, and now that produces a hung parliament. So it's not just a repudiation of the far right in France but a repudiation of Macron? That's what I would highlight. To understand why we can get these extreme outcomes in the European Parliament, it's helpful to know that people often aren't voting on what the Parliament will do. Instead, they vote to send a firm message to their national governments that they don't like what they're doing. You might vote for somebody who would annoy the government the most or to give a voice to smaller parties. If you look at the European Parliament elections, the extreme right won in France and Germany. But if you look at all of Europe, that's not the case. The European People's Party, which is center-right, is still the largest party in the parliament, and that will produce a lot of stability. Well, Viktor Orban of Hungary and Marine Le Pen of France's National Rally just announced their own far-right alliance, which makes them the third largest voting bloc in the parliament. Could they do some damage? I think Marine Le Pen is trying to grab the attention of Europe after the French election. Fidesz, which is the leading party of Hungary, is looked at with worry, but it's relatively small. Can they do damage? They only have 84 members out of 720 in parliament. They're the third largest group because there are so many small groups. I'm not sure they can be so creative to dominate parliament with 84 people. Now I'm starting to feel like the dire warnings of a far-right takeover in Europe might be a tad overblown. In my view, that's how it is. I think there are two cases that might give insight. In 2022, in Italy, Giorgia Meloni was elected. She ran on an extreme right-wing platform and she represents a party with a fascist past. Everybody was worried, what's going to happen next? But even if she still uses this nationalist rhetoric, she's become much more mainstream. She's endorsed EU policies and NATO, and people have just not seen her as very troubling. The second example is the Netherlands, where the populist PVV and its leader, Geert Wilders, became the largest party in an election in November. But he couldn't form a coalition because nobody wanted to rule with him, so the process to choose a new prime minister took a very long time. During that process, the left decided that they needed a stronger voice in Europe, so they came together to vote their party ahead of the PVV in the parliament elections. Having said all that, I do think Europe has moved further to the right in the past 30 years. But I don't see an extreme right wave. What about over the next 30 years, though? Because it seems younger voters aren't the progressive idealists they used to be. Yes, and we really need research to figure this out. In the past, we've seen that younger people are more idealistic and have more liberal values. But this time around, they voted more on the right. Germany, for instance, had 16-year-olds voting for the first time, and it looks like they didn't vote on the left at all, they voted on the extreme right. This could be in part because they're getting their news from social media, and if you are sympathetic to strong voices and simple solutions, you can get into an echo chamber of these populist, right-wing voices. This is virgin terrain for researchers, and it looks like it's a different trend. So while it's too soon to be dire about the far right now, we're not out of the woods. This interview has been edited for length and clarity. The shot, as big as this moment has become, it's still the setup for something bigger. For the past 40 years, the soccer world has seen Canada as an easy mark. That's over now, even with the loss to Argentina, Cathal Kelly writes. Read more about Canada's incredible Copa run here. The wrap, What else we're following? At home, after Green Party Deputy Leader Jonathan Pednault resigned for personal reasons yesterday, Leader Elizabeth May said she's ready for the next election. I am a 70-year-old angry, cranky version of Greta Thunberg. Abroad, a Russian court has accused Yulia Navalnaya, Alexei Navalny's widow, of participating in an extremist community and says she'll be subject to arrest if she ever returns to the country. Building a mystery, Sarah McLachlan will take part in a new documentary on Lilith Fair that draws from more than 600 hours of archival footage. Building a heat dome, yep, climate change made last month's scorching temperatures up to 10 times more likely, Environment and Climate Change Canada has found. The Sydney Morning Herald highlights the pressing issues in Australia, such as the cost of living, housing, and investment, which are being neglected due to political distractions. Instead of addressing the root causes like inflation and inefficient economic policies, blame is often misplaced on entities like large retailers or international students. Proposals like supermarket divestment powers are criticized for potentially increasing prices and risking jobs, especially in regional areas. The real solution lies in tackling inflation through limiting spending and enhancing productivity, while addressing housing supply issues by reforming state planning policies. Investment in Australia is also hindered by regulatory and industrial relations settings, not just the lack of incentives. Effective, evidence-based policymaking, though time-consuming, is essential to solving these complex problems. Yahoo US reports that a Russian court has issued an arrest warrant for Yulia Navalnaya, the widow of opposition leader Alexei Navalny, who died in prison under mysterious circumstances. Navalnaya, living in exile, is accused of being involved in an extremist organization. The court's decision for pretrial detention will be effective upon her extradition to Russia. Navalnaya blames President Vladimir Putin for her husband's death and vows to continue his fight for democracy. The situation underscores the ongoing dangers faced by Russian opposition members, even those living abroad, as they are often targeted by the Kremlin. The Telegraph shares the story of Sam, a 26-year-old who worked remotely from Spain for a month without informing his boss. His manager only found out during a Zoom call, but merely asked Sam to ensure his work was completed. Sam managed his tasks efficiently, balancing work with leisure activities. This reflects a growing trend where employees are working remotely from different countries, driven by the flexibility offered post-pandemic. However, this practice can lead to legal complications for employers, including tax liabilities and potential deportation issues. Despite the allure, such arrangements can cause internal conflicts and productivity concerns among teams. Sam's experience highlights the benefits of remote work, but also the challenges and risks involved. Thank you for tuning in. The content above showcases the latest briefing reports and analytical synopses, thoughtfully curated by the 6Do team. These insights stem from a wide array of reputable media outlets, think tanks, government sources, and specialized experts worldwide. We encourage you to explore these sources for a comprehensive perspective. Keep in mind that while the content may not always align with the official standpoint of 6Do Brief, it's not meant to be taken as absolute directives for decision-making. Comprising seasoned media professionals, learned scholars, and accomplished scientists, the 6Do team embodies a trailblazing, fully independent media entity. To customize 6Do Brief to meet your professional needs, you have the option to subscribe to a diverse array of briefings on our website, 6dobrief.com. Regardless of your location, you can conveniently receive 6Do Brief via email.
Lights dim, voices loud, headlines flashing wild. We're in a frame and now, stories told, it's time to plow. Eyes glued, truth pursued, understanding woven through. Heartbeats race breaking through, knowledge spreads the new view. Breaking the news, breaking the day, truth and insight our way. Every story, every play, live and clear we convey. Shadows lift, facts unfold, moments chasing, stories told. Heroes, villains, tales evolved in this hour, truth is gold. Depths revealed, voices bright, news in focus, black and white. Every angle sheds some light, morning, evening, breaking the day, truth and insight our way. Every story, every play, living clear we convey. Depths revealed, voices bright, news in focus, black and white. Every angle sheds some light, morning, evening, through the night. Breaking the news, breaking the day. Truth and insight our way. Every story, every play.